Existentialism is you cover sometimes in philosophy, and we've done this, I haven't been really explicit about it, but you're covering schools of thought, right? Or different philosophies, like the empiricists, the rationals, the deontologists versus the utilitarians, the obstructivists versus the motivationalists, right? Skepticism versus epistemics, right? These sorts of things. Existentialism was both a philosophical, literary, and social movement. It was at its height after World War II in Europe. The name of it, focuses on human existence and the question of the meaning of human existence. We can probably guess why people in Europe might be worried about that question after World War II. Right? Sartre, who's going to be our example and who you read about today, he was actually fought Nazis in the French Resistance as well. There's a picture of him. And he was like an academic as well, right? Both he and Simone de Beauvoir, who I'll talk about a little bit as well, towards the end here, were both existentialists, right? And so they both take their point of departure from that basic first principle of existentialism that existence precedes essence. Right? So keep that in mind, and I'm going to add to that a little bit here. So Sartre here, he died in 1980. And you read about this article from Devlin, where these ideas are pretty much introduced here. And so, right. I've seen the first one. I know there's a sequel that just came out. I haven't seen it. Has anybody seen it? No. Is it any good? Maybe I'll watch it this summer. So it does a good job of illustrating these ideas. Sometimes I use The Office. I'll have an Office example here as well as a Pickle Rick example. So I've taken some passages from one of Sartre's main essays called Existentialism as a Humanism. So humanism, usually that's thought to presuppose some human essence, like a universal human nature. Sartre's rejecting that. So how is he going to try and get humanism? What does he mean by that from this idea that we exist and don't have an essence? And in other words, he's going to try and square that circle a little bit. There's a tension there, though. So first he starts out, and the essay was to defend existentialism. And so he points out that, look, first there are two types of existentialism. There's a theistic version of it, and there's an atheistic version of it. Sartre's an example of an atheistic existentialist. Somebody like Søren Kierkegaard would be the Danish philosopher, 19th century Danish philosopher, would be an example of a theistic existentialist. He has a version of divine command theory that gives up on objectivity and universalism. So we get Sartre here, and so the atheist existentialist declares with greater consistency that if God does not exist, then there is at least one being whose existence comes before its essence. If you read somebody like St. Thomas Aquinas, a religious thinker, he said that God's existence is his essence, right? So again, that's kind of in the background of his claim here. So there's one being, human beings, whose existence comes before our essence. Before it can be defined by any conception of it. So that being is man, or as Martin Heidegger, he's referring to there, has it, the human reality. Dasein. Right? If you're a philosophy major or minor, that's what he means there. With Dasein as being there, right, in a particular spot. So his claim is that all human beings, right, the human reality is that you're located in a particular place and you have phenomenal access to the world from a particular vantage point, and you can't transcend that vantage point. You can't get outside of it like up at a God's eye perspective, floating above social structures and human reality. Observe it impartially. Right? So it's human reality. What do we mean by the saying that existence precedes essence? We mean that man first of all exists, encounters himself, surges up in the world, and defines himself afterwards. If man, as the existentialist sees him, is not definable, it is because, to begin with, he is nothing. One of Sartre's other big books is called Being and Nothingness, so existence and nothingness. Right? There is no essence. He will not be anything until later, and then he will be what he makes of himself. So, very different than most virtue ethics, particularly Aristotle's, but this is still an ethics of self-cultivation. So in virtue ethics, regardless of the version of it, you're trying to cultivate certain dispositions in yourself, and here we're trying to cultivate authenticity for ourselves. Because authenticity was not a thing in Aristotle at all. It was that we all have one human function, and we got to perfect it to become good people. So if man exists as existentialist sees him, he is not definable. It is because, to begin with, he's nothing, he makes himself. So there is no human nature because there is no God to have a conception of it. Man simply is. Not that he simply is what he conceives himself to be. So like we can just imagine, it's not like I can sit around and imagine myself that I'm like I have a full head of hair or something, like that I got Jesse's hair cut like I did when I was in undergraduate. Yeah. I looked like Jesus for a little while, much to my mother's chagrin. All right, so thus there's no human nature, there's no God to have conceived it. Man simply is. He is not simply what he conceives himself to be, but that he wills to performing it, right? So as he conceives himself after already existing, as he wills to be after that leap towards existence, man is nothing else but that which he makes of himself. That's the first principle of existentialism. So there is no doer behind the deed. You just are your deeds, according to this view. So there can no longer. So let me back up one other kind of key distinction that I don't really. Pretty sure they didn't mention this in the reading, but it's an important thing in the backdrop of existence precedes essence, and it's Sartre's distinction between being in itself and being for itself. So all the things that exist either have one of these two kinds of existence. My water bottle here is a thing in the strict sense of the term, right? It has a function. How did this come to be? Yeah, it was made. Somebody designed it, conceived it for a function, a purpose, and then they produced it, and it is a water bottle. It holds fluid, right? Being in itself, it's a thing. Its existence is well defined. Right? Being for itself is human reality, and we're not like things. Our existence is open-ended, right? So it's future-looking, and we have to conceive of how we want ourselves to be and to make ourselves in a particular way. So we don't have a definition. There is, again, no essence. Our existence is open-ended and fluid. So we get being for itself, human existence, being in itself, things, right? When we start to deny our freedom, we try and start treating ourselves and others like things. It's going to be the problem for Sartre. So as Dostoevsky wrote, if God did not exist, everything would be permitted, and that for existentialism is the starting point. Everything is indeed permitted if God does not exist, and man is in consequence forlorn. Things mentioned, right? For he cannot find anything to depend on either within himself. So it's not even like we have this identity that I'm trying to discover within my own subjectivity and then win recognition for or realize, or outside of myself. I'm not what my parents want me to be or what God designed me to be. There's none of that. So no internal or external standard I have to make myself. In other words, it's a creative act. Right? It's a creative act. So he discovers forthwith that he is without excuse. So we're radically free to make ourselves what we want out of ourselves. That means we also have radical responsibility for how we are made. Sartre goes so far as to suggest that if I'm unhappy with being a bald guy, I'm responsible for my unhappiness. I can go get hair plugs, which I'm not going to do, by the way. But if I was unhappy with being bald, I'd have to change myself. So man is condemned to be free. It's another famous line out of Sartre. They were like kind of more literary, so their slogans are kind of better than some of the other slogans that you find in philosophy. Condemned to be free because once thrown into the world, he is responsible for everything he does. So we're radically responsible for ourselves. I can't blame the devil, didn't make me do it. I wasn't motivated by God to do it. It's all on me. Right? It's not my genes or my upbringing or my socialization or my culture. I have to accept the radical responsibility for what I'm doing. So as a humanism, so he says, for if indeed existence precedes essence, one will never be able to explain or justify one's actions by reference to a specific human nature. Like Aristotle, his whole ethics was based on a conception of human nature. Right? So man is There is no determinism. Man is free. Man is freedom. So again, being for itself. Nor, on the other hand, if God does not exist, are we provided with any values or commands that could legitimize our behavior. Thus, we have neither behind us nor before us, in a luminous realm of values, any means of justification or excuse. We're left alone without excuse. It's all on us. I'm radically free. That means I'm radically responsible for my condition. So that's what we mean. That's what I mean when I say that man is condemned to be free. Condemned because he did not create himself, yet nevertheless at liberty. And from the moment that he is thrown into the world, he is responsible for everything he does. Right. I'm going to come back to Simone de Beauvoir, and her book was called The Second Sex. And a big section of that book is a rejection of biological essentialism about sex roles. Right, so she's saying, you don't even get to appeal to your biology. So subjectivism, and you got to be careful here because we've used that term a couple different ways. Well, we've seen that term earlier in the semester, and here he's given a slightly different spin on it. So subjectivism here doesn't just mean the denial of like moral truth. It means, on the one hand, the freedom of the individual subject, and on the other, that one cannot pass beyond human subjectivity. There's that there-ness and particularity and contingency of each of our own conditions. So, again, just to give like kind of a non-moral example here, each of you is in the room in a particular location. You have a particular vantage point on the world because of that. But that means you can't get outside of it. You can't like transcend your facticity, right? Or the contingencies that make up the world that we live in, including the ones about our own selves. Which is that our human subjectivity has a limited perspective. It's incomplete. It is that the latter, which is the deeper meaning of existentialism, when we say that man chooses himself, we do mean that every one of us must choose himself. Again, there's the condemned to be free part. But that we also mean in choosing for himself, he chooses for all men. So when you make a choice, you're making a value choice, a value judgment about what's good and what's bad. And that's a model not only for yourself, but everybody else. So there's the humanism part of it. There's a tension there because he's saying, why is it that me choosing for me would be a model for everybody else? Why do I have to go that far, given that it's subjective, right? Trapped in that subjectivity. So there's a tension there, at least in the early Sartre. So to choose between this or that at the same time is to affirm a value of that which is chosen. For we are unable to ever choose the worst. So look, if you're choosing to bed rot, you got to own that, right? If you're choosing to get up and go to work, you own that as well. So what we choose is always the better, and nothing can be better for us unless it is better for all. So again, how is he justifying that universalism there? So if, moreover, existence precedes essence, and we will to exist at the same time as we fashion our image, that image is valid for all and for the entire epoch in which we find ourselves. Our responsibility is thus much greater than we supposed. So I'm not only responsible for the choices I make for myself, I'm responsible for the model that I'm providing to others. So it's a radical sense of responsibility there. So it's impossible to find each and every man a universal essence that can be called human nature, but we do have the universality of the human condition. So it's another kind of a subtle shift with the existentialists. They move from talking about human nature and different theories of human nature, trying to come up with a single correct theory of human nature, to talk about the human condition, right? So our condition here in the 21st century is a little bit different than the human condition at the beginning of the 20th century, just in terms of how technology shapes our existence, right? So that's the kind of thing starts thinking about here in terms of our epochs. So it's not by chance that the thinkers today are so much more ready to speak of the condition than the nature of man. By his condition, they understand with more or less clarity all the limitations which a priori define man's fundamental situation. So again, using that term we encountered in the epistemology section, the necessary structures that we didn't get to choose, but that we have to choose within. So man may be born a slave in a pagan society, or he'd be a feudal baron, or a member of the proletariat, but what never vary are the necessities of being in the world, of having to labor and to die here. So those are the sorts of conditions that we all have to confront. These limitations are neither subjective nor objective, or rather there is both a subjective and an objective aspect to them. Objective because we meet them everywhere and they are everywhere recognizable, and subjective because they are lived and are nothing if man does not live them. So just take our institution here as an example. We're all participants in this institution called a university. It's got certain policies and administrators. And so you didn't get to choose, like you got to choose which major, but you didn't get to choose the curriculum for that major, right? So, that's an objective feature of the world that you have to live through, right? If there were no people around to enforce policies, then the institution would not be an institution anymore. So that's what he means by we live them, but there are also things that we confront that are not of our own. The denial of our radical freedom and our radical responsibility. This is bad faith. Sometimes we hear this phrase bad faith, and what it basically means is, it's someone that's presenting themselves to be acting in a certain way when they're really doing other things, right? So they're acting in bad faith. They're lying to others. Sartre has a different idea about that. It's not so much a lie to others as it is primarily a lie to ourselves. So the situation can be the same for bad faith if this, as we have said, is indeed a lie to oneself. To be sure, the one who practices bad faith is hiding a displeasing truth or presenting as truth an unpleasing untruth. Bad faith has the appearance and structure of falsehood. Only what changes everything is the fact that in bad faith it is from myself that I am hiding the truth. Thus, the duality of the deceiver and deceived does not exist here. Bad faith implies the unity of a single consciousness. So I'm trying to lie to myself by hiding, more specifically, I'm denying that I'm radically free, and I'm saying, well, I did it because the devil made me do it and abjugating my responsibility for my actions, or that I did this good thing because God told me to do it. No, it's not God doing it either. It's me choosing to do those sorts of things. Right? So bad faith. Here's my example. Pickle Rick. Have y'all seen this episode of Rick and Morty? So Rick is this scientist. If you're not familiar with the show, he can travel through the multiverse. He can do all these technologically great things. He's technically the smartest man in the multiverse. So across all the universes, he's the smartest person in all of those. He doesn't get along with his family so much. They're supposed to go to family therapy. To avoid family therapy, Rick turns himself into a pickle so that he can't go to therapy and denies that he had anything to do with this. Right? So he doesn't want to go to therapy and confront his bad actions towards his family, so he turns himself into a pickle so he doesn't have to go confront himself. Pickle Rick. Sartre's example is of a waiter who doesn't like being a waiter anymore but doesn't change their condition. So notice what happens there is the waiter's going to come to view their self in terms of only their social role, their function, a thing, and lives in bad faith. So what I attempt to realize is being in itself of the cafe waiter. So I'm treating myself like just a social role and a thing, as if it were not just in my power to confer their value and their urgency upon my duties and the rights of my position, as if it were not my free choice to get up each morning or at 5 o'clock or to remain in bed, even though it meant getting fired. So even if there are consequences for your actions from others, you're still radically free to do what you want. As if from the very fact that I sustain this role in existence, I did not transcend it on every side. So we're denying the fact that we're not reducible to those roles. Yet there is no doubt that I am, in a sense, a cafe waiter. Otherwise, could I not just as well call myself a diplomat or a reporter? But if I am one, this cannot be the mode of being in itself. I am a waiter in the mode of being what I am not, namely a thing. Treating oneself like a thing. It's like self-objectification. So this can happen because of things I do to myself. It can also happen because of the way I relate to others. Sartre famously claimed that hell is other people. Right? So what does he mean by this? It means they look at you and observe you and freeze you into a thing. Right? And you come to internalize that as well. He gives this, it's like basically the most perverted example I know of in Western philosophy about a peeping Tom. Right? So he talks about this person who's in a hallway looking through, being a peeping Tom looking through a keyhole, right? So, but all of a sudden I hear footsteps right? So I'm alone to myself. I think I'm alone. I'm not really thinking that anybody can see me or what I'm doing. But then I hear footsteps, and I understand myself as the person who is stepping into the hallway sees me, right, as a thing. So, but all of a sudden I hear footsteps in the hall. Someone is looking at me. What does this mean? It means that I am suddenly affected in my being, and that essential modifications appear in my structure. Modifications which I can apprehend and fix conceptually by means of a reflective cogito. I think, therefore I am. Phrase from Descartes that we encountered earlier in the semester. First of all, I now exist as myself for my unreflective consciousness. It is this eruption of the self that has been most often described. I see myself because somebody sees me, as it is usually expressed. So they see me not as my being for myself, but as a peeping Tom, right? So I experience shame from that, but it's because I see myself as someone else sees me, not as I see my own self. So it's like internalizing the other. It's like, so you could objectify yourself, but you can also become objectified by the way other people see you, right? If you internalize that. So the look or the gaze, here's another example of this. This one's from The Office. It comes from this episode, Night Out, where, y'all know about The Office? Toby's in love with Pam, but Pam is dating Jim. They're trapped in the office park after hours. They're waiting on the security guy to come let them out. They're all kind of tired. And Toby here puts his hand on Pam's knee, right, which is a thing that you would do maybe if you were in a romantic relationship with Pam. And he realized that he's done this in front of Jim and other people. And he immediately says, I'm quitting, and he runs out and tries to scale the fence over the barbed wire to get away from it. Anguish. Right, anguish. He sees himself as they see him. So Simone de Beauvoir was a contemporary and actually a romantic partner of Sartre as well, and talks about this with regard to sex and gender. So one is not born a woman, one becomes a woman, right? There's no a fixed essence of what a woman is. You have to make yourself as a woman. So she has this book called The Second Sex, right? And so notice how Sartre was speaking. And I go back and forth. I think in the French it is a male that he says he all the time, if I'm not correct. So she picks up on this from her fellow existentialist Sartre, as well as other thinkers in the history of Western philosophy, where the masculine perspective, we saw this with care ethics, the worry is the masculine perspective has been defined as the standard, right? And woman is viewed as other to that standard. So thus humanity is male, and man defines woman not in herself, but as relative to him. Again, it comes from The Second Sex is the name of the book. It's a big, thick thing. She is not regarded as an autonomous being. The male is seen as being the autonomous agent, an actor, and women are passive and evaluated from the standpoint of that standard, the male standard. So what she is simply what man decrees called the sex, right? By which she is meant that she appears essentially to male as a sexual being. For him, she is sex, absolute sex no less. She is defined and differentiated with reference to man, and not he with reference to her. She is the incidental, the inessential, as opposed to the essential. He is the subject, he is the absolute, she is the other, from that standard. So again, it comes from a book called The Second Sex. She also wrote a book called The Ethics of Ambiguity, right? So I'll mention a little passage from that here as well. So again, think of Sartre's notion of freedom. Think of the way of conventional stereotypes about social roles can limit people. So freedom is to go beyond those limitations, right? So there is kind of an element where freedom is transgression of those barriers. So to show your true ability is always, in a sense, to surpass the limits of your ability, to go a little beyond them, to dare to seek to invent, that is, at such a moment that new talents are revealed, discovered, and realized. Therein lies freedom. So the example that always comes to mind when I think of this is football. Football is primarily a male viewed as a male sport, right? But every once in a while, there's a woman that wants to be the kicker, right? Or to come out and play a position. So that's going beyond those limits. They're trying to excel by going beyond the limits that society or others place on them. So that's what freedom is for these existentialists, right? But it's an ambiguous situation that we're in. Philosophers have tried to mask it with these different theories of human nature and universalist ethics, but according to Beauvoir here and Sartre as well, our condition is ambiguous. We're thrown into the world. We want to do things, but we don't have any values that are absolute to guide us in doing those things. So that's the ambiguity of our condition. As long as men have lived, and they have all felt this tragic ambiguity of their condition, but as long as there have been philosophers and they have thought, most of them had tried to mask it with like a universal imperative, right? Or a theory that's supposed to apply one decision-making procedure to all moral questions for all people. So that's a little bit about existentialism.